Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar, Restarting Construction and Mitigating Risks. My name is Jennifer Hartigan and I'm your host today. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and all participant lines are automatically muted during the program. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few things. Today's presentation will last about 60 minutes. If you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, please type your question in the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be reviewed and answered during the question and answer segment at the end. However, please feel free to submit your questions at any time. Note that we will not be using the raise hand feature today. As a reminder, all participant lines are muted during this program. It's now my pleasure to introduce Michael McGinnis, NAIOPNJ's CEO. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Jen, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. NAIOP is working every day to advocate for the commercial real estate industry, which has been made even more difficult during this pandemic as we've had to pivot to cope with all the various obstacles. We are bringing today information that you need to continue with your construction business in New Jersey. Our mission has never been more important, and I invite the many non-members with us today to join the association. We do need you. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items I'd like to mention. First of all, I want to thank the folks at Structure Tone and the Stowe Building Group for presenting today. We really appreciate the help. Upcoming events, June 10th, we have our Regulatory, Legislative, and Legal Update webinar with DEP, DCA, and the Governor's Office featured, and we're offering 2 core credits, so be sure to sign up for that. June 23rd to the 25th is our industrial conference, ICON Virtual. Early registration discount ends June 1st. July 9th is our Public Policy Symposium webinar with Congressman Frank Pallone, Senate President Steve Sweeney, Assembly Speaker Craig Coughlin, and others. Please sign up for that as well. Registration will be live in a matter of days. September 9th is our annual Commercial Real Estate Awards Gala. We've got our fingers crossed that that will in fact take place as initially planned. We are 93% sold on tickets, again, September 9th. And last but not least, September 21st is our Golf Classic at Trump National. With that, I would like to again say thank you to the folks at Structure Tone and Stowe, who will now discuss some comprehensive guidelines and strategies to manage new health and safety requirements and ensure that everyone feels safe while mitigating risks. So Jim, would you please take it from here? Thank you.
Michael, thanks so much for having STO Building Group, along with some of our family of companies, the Structure Tone team in New Jersey and New York, as well as we've got our Layton construction team with us as well, to round out our national footprint and experience. So really brief on Structure Tone, and we'll get right to the meat and potatoes so the audience can understand what it's been like going back to sites, as well as maintaining sites throughout the crisis. STO is an acronym for Structure Tone Organization. STO Building Group is a brand that we launched in the past year or so to represent all of the brands that are under our umbrella. Most recently joining us was the Layton construction team out of the Midwest. And we've got Paul Drexel with us from that team. Layton is one of our businesses that has never stopped working. Their offices have not been shut. But across the STO platform, and let me back up, STO was just recently ranked number 7 of the top 400 ENR contractors in the United States. We've also got an international presence throughout Canada, the UK, and Ireland. Roughly half of our offices were in shut cities. The other half were not in shut cities, but in those cities we opted to work from home, but had quite a few active projects. In fact, today we have almost 1,000 active projects throughout our cities, and many active subcontracting firms. And as a result, an enormous amount of experience from the past 12 weeks to share with the audience today. So, what it's felt like recently is a little bit like the post 9/11 era, where there's a realization that the world has changed, but we've got to get back to a new normal, and getting the fear factor out of the process and creating some confidence and certainty around the procedures that we used to take for granted as being standard. What you're looking at now is a map of the STO organization, and it shows you the dots in all of our cities. I'm not going to go through the dots. You can see we have 40 operations out there, and all but New York City are back to work. And, we are waiting. We hope next week or the week after we'll get a green light for the New York City market as well. Although in New York City, we've been very busy on 36 sites. Some have been healthcare and been active throughout the crises. And in the past few weeks, we've had several opened up as essential sites. So again, back to, it's a fear versus economic decision our clients are making and our subcontractors are making. And it's our job to give everybody the confidence that when they choose to come back to the sites or open up their projects, there's enough certainty and safety measures taken from the CDC guidelines and the World Health Organization guidelines, as well as incorporating local building departments information and suggestions, so that the sites are really well run, just like the old safety value that most contractors would make a top priority. Health of the workers has got to be top priority, so that the workforce not only returns to the sites, but they're very productive, and that the client's dollars are being used the most efficient manner possible. What I want to just add is that because of the size of our platform that makes it unique for STO, we were able to build a center of excellence, an innovation team that focused on a feedback loop throughout our 40 cities. So our open cities and our shut cities with essential sites could share notes about what to do, how to do it, research products that could be used as extensions of our PPE gear, and best practices for vertical and horizontal transportation on greenfield sites all the way through pre-war buildings that have fast track schedules. So it's quite a wide variety of projects in the STO platform. And today I would tell you that our operations teams do have a variety of strategies that are not the same from site to site. So that's one of the footnotes, is while there's CDC guidelines, there's a variety of operation strategies on every site to make sure that we are maximizing safety and efficiency on each site being different. So I think I've covered my opening remarks. Just if you could go to the next slide, Jennifer. And here I'm going to do a handoff to Paul Drexel and Steve Neeson, who will talk more about our return to sites and some of those strategies. And then I'll pick up at the end with a few more remarks. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jim. It's really good to be here. Really looking forward to sharing some lessons learned. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. One more, sorry. There we go. Okay, you're looking at a slide now that's got some statistics. The reason we're showing you this is just to give you an idea that we have been working all over the country during COVID. We worked on enormous jobs. We worked on small jobs. And just to put it in perspective, we put in more than 7 million subcontractor hours since COVID became an issue. So what you're going to hear are lessons that were hard learned, and I want to share them so that you'll have some insights as you start back to work about what to expect. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is something that probably should have been self-evident, but it wasn't to me. I had this idea as COVID came into being that there was going to be some way we could keep it off our jobs, and that's just not realistic. What we have found, and we've done hundreds of tests when circumstances dictated that on our jobs, is that the majority of people who test positive are asymptomatic and they remain asymptomatic. And so it's very difficult to have any procedure in place, at least with current testing availability, that would keep people off your jobs who are infected. And so your goal is to have procedures in place so that when those folks are on your job, you don't have an outbreak on the job. And that's why it is so critical that you have the procedures and you follow them. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So Steve, you want to step in?
Great, Paul, thanks. Good morning, everybody. So this is as dynamic and a fluid situation, I think, as our industry has ever had to deal with. So clear information and communication for all the parties is absolutely critical. Everything we know right now is based on the current CDC recommendations. In every state, there's a Department of Health that generally has some guidelines. Local jurisdictions, towns and cities even have very particular requirements, OSHA requirements and reinforcement of other recommendations. So just as an example, in New Jersey, we were tuned into Governor Murphy's daily press conference to really understand where we were headed and be prepared to start coordinating efforts. So in New Jersey, we had the challenge of straddling jobs that remained open and jobs that were shut down. So we had to address both tactics. We're learning every week as this develops. So new orders, best practices, as Paul mentions, the lessons learned from all this experience and gathered from basically California to London helps us decipher these changing landscapes. Some of the things that we think make sense, COVID-19 task force meetings. So in addition to meetings where you might incorporate safety requirements, a COVID-19 specific task force meeting for all the stakeholders could be very beneficial. And don't try to predict the future. We've adapted this far very well, and that's through clear communication and really understanding the information that we're being given. So trying to incorporate those and update programs and improve the communication is critical.
So Steve, can I just say one thing about the COVID task force meetings, given our audience? One recommendation I would make is that you determine who all your stakeholders are. So if you have an office building and you've got contractors working and subcontractors working and you have tenants, maybe you have customers, it's really important that you put a representative of everyone who's a stakeholder onto a committee and talk at least weekly about what you're seeing on the ground, because no matter what policies you enact, there's going to be confusion at points and there's going to need to be changes made. And the best way to have your ear to the ground is be constantly meeting with everyone who's having to deal with it, because this disease is as bad as your weakest link and it doesn't respect boundaries of employers or anything else. And so everyone has to be on the same page, and that's one really good way to do it. Should we go to the next slide? So along those same lines, it would be a very good idea, if you've been shut down, you're reopening, to have a training session with clear communication with everyone who is a stakeholder. So it would be online with the COVID task force, where everyone understands what the procedures are going to be and what everyone needs to do to be safe. It's not just the contractors who are on your site. Another key point is you need to have someone who, I would call it the referee. Your protocols can be great, but if people aren't following them, then that's going to be a problem. So for instance, elevators, if you have a maximum number, people stay 6 feet apart as they're waiting, there needs to be someone to make sure that these things are really happening, because the policy's no good if people aren't doing the things they need to do. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so these are some really important, just practical suggestions. Face coverings, obviously, first you got to know what are your local ordinances, so that may govern what's happening. But we went to a 100% mask all the time on our projects, and I was really surprised. We got no pushback from our subcontractors. This is one thing you find about these safety protocols is subcontractors, trade contractors, they appreciate the fact that you're taking steps to keep them safe, and they understand that masks are to prevent others from spreading the disease to you. And the fact that we're requiring everyone wear them has actually been really well received, even in Phoenix and Las Vegas, where it's over 100 degrees now, and really good for job site morale. Safe social distancing. Okay, this is a really important point. You really need to think about how many people you're going to have impacting your site or your building. And you need to do what we call a pinch point analysis, which is where are the places that people are going to congregate and I'm not going to be able to maintain safe social distancing. So loading docks, elevators, lobbies, in the job site itself. Think about that and have a plan to make sure that people are keeping their distance from one another, which is the most important thing you can do. In the construction world, we have pre-task planning, which essentially means every day, every trade gets together and says, okay, here are things we're going to do today, tasks we're going to do. Here are risks associated with that. So we're working at height. Here's how we're going to mitigate that. And that is we're going to be tied off at these points as we're doing this work. We've just added the COVID-19 pre-task planning to that process. And the real focus is there something that we have to do today where we won't be able to maintain social distance? There are some tasks, you don't want the cure to be worse than the disease. So there's some tasks that are only safe if you have a couple of people close together. When that's going to happen, have another, so certainly you've got the masks on, you've got gloves, and there are a million different things you can do. You can build a partition depending on where you're at, but have that plan of where are we really going to have some challenges today. I will say of all the measures we're going to talk about, safe social distancing is the hardest one to enforce. Masks has been easy. Some of the other things we'll talk about have been easy, but that one's been really difficult. And then on the infections, you will encounter infections. So it's happening. It happens on our job sites. As I said before, the goal is to make sure there's not an outbreak on the job site itself. But the basic rules are you have to look at each situation on its own merits. You got to have someone who's assigned, who gets familiar with this process, who gathers the facts themselves to know what it is they should do. Once you know you have an infection, you've got to think through some things like who's going to be notified about this? What information can I provide? We never provide names, but we provide enough information people can keep themselves safe. So, you know, the messaging that you send out is critical because you have to be transparent and honest. So, hey, we have someone on the painting crew that's working on the exterior of the building who has tested positive. We're going to take the following steps. And the steps are we're going to shut down, we're going to clean, we're going to have the folks who are in close proximity to that person tested as well so that we're comfortable we're not spreading this at the job site, and we'll be back up and running on Monday. And that last point is always emphasize that what you are doing is for their safety. And we can only get through this together if everyone's doing what they're supposed to. And that eliminates the inciting panic idea of, you know, which at the beginning when we were doing this, there were times when we'd notify people and panic would be incited. As we've gotten further into this and we're handling it that way, people actually appreciate the fact that, oh, they're taking these steps. This is going to keep me safe. I appreciate they're doing that. You can go ahead and advance. So one thing we didn't talk about just before, I must have missed it on the last one, but two really basic things that we ought to be doing. One is questioning before people come in. So we call it pre-entry checks, risk factors. And it's the basic questions of, do you have any of these symptoms? You know, you list the symptoms. Have you been in the presence of anyone who's been tested and is positive? And other things. I will tell you that's probably one of the best things we've done, because we have had a number of individuals that we've kept off our jobs based on those answers. And one thing, just School of Hard Knocks, that we learned was when we were originally doing all that questioning on our own, there were instances where someone was positive on the job, and when we did our contact tracing to determine who on the job site they'd had close contact with, invariably one of their partners, you know, other tradesmen would say, yeah, he told me his wife tested positive last Friday, and here it is Tuesday, and he's continued to come to work. We didn't get that information. So we pushed that down to the superintendents of the subcontractors who actually have personal relationships with the workers and actually know their situations. And that has worked much better, because they're asking the questions, they're telling you if they have anybody who's in a risk category so you can follow up, and they actually know what's happening in these folks' lives and can actually get you better information. The other issue I'll just hit from School of Hard Knocks practical purposes is taking temperatures. So we are not requiring temperatures on all our jobs. We're doing it if there's a local mandate to do it, or if an owner wants us to do that. I will say the upside to taking temperatures is it really makes workers feel better. They feel like you're taking another step. tell you the downside is we've taken thousands and thousands of temperatures. We have yet to keep anyone off the job because they tested a high temperature. And I think that's probably because of two things. One is people know better now than to come to work if they're feeling ill. And the CDC says the temperature that you have to worry about is 100.4 or higher. When people get to that point, I think they're probably not feeling good, and so they're not coming. The other benefit of the other challenges with the temperature taking is if you're going to do it yourself, you have to worry about PPE for the person who's doing it. You have to have the thermometers. You have to make sure that as you're bringing people in, they're not congregating and making the cure worse than the disease. One option is there are third-party vendors out there. One we use is Medics because they work all over the country. I'm not pitching them. There's others as well. But having a third-party vendor, I think, is a great idea, and that's what we try to do because they show up with their own PPE. They bring the thermometer. They know at what temperature if there's a problem. They understand the record-keeping issues. Just makes life easier. I think you can, yeah. Go ahead, Steve.
There we go. Yeah, and you know, just a reminder to us all, it's all about people and their safety and health is clearly the number one priority. Just to expand on a couple of case studies that Paul was elaborating on. You know, the subs really are looking for the CMs and GCs to lead by example. You know, we even help them source PPE materials and try to find vendors when you know, the explosion was happening here locally. And a big issue about coaching the pre-task planning efforts, that's a wild variable. You know, so you think about millwork teams, you know, guys that have to work in close proximity, you know, hanging millwork panels. How do we come up with a safe plan for those guys and women to get the work done? You know, landlord and tenant concerns, you know, additional logistics around entry, you know, how to separate those personnel streams is really important to people's comfort. You know, we learned in some places if the temperature screening is going to be done, you have to maintain social distancing while the people are in the queue. Separating tenants from workforce, trade workforce is very important, and you need to be in a protected environment because most of the scanning guns or the passive technology, it needs to be done within 3 to 6 feet of the device. So obviously that's that pinch point reference, you know, is how do you get all these people into the same place, particularly in an occupied building? Less of a concern on a green site. The other piece there is the separation of the work. We're seeing greater demands for hard separations, you know, where maybe poly sheets would be acceptable if it was a temporary condition, even to the degree of using a system that we use in hospital work called EdgeGuard, which is basically a temporary partition that pops up between the floor and the ceiling and has seals top and bottom and functioning doors. And that also helps create a separation for air streams. So talking to design professionals, we're seeing pushes for, you know, potential separation of air, more physically, negative air systems, higher filtration, and basically just proving to the tenants, hey, they're safe to come to work in the building. Availability. You know, building departments around the country, everybody's addressing this in different fashions. Some constructive ways we've solved getting them to the sites is video documentation for things that they need to inspect to keep jobs moving. That's been really well received. And the same with design partners. You know, some companies have adopted stay-at-home or work-from-home policies. So in respect to that, you know, we're trying to be cooperative and figure out solutions. And how do we leverage the technology? And again, we're getting really good feedback. So that's a great thing for the team to discuss is, hey, how are we all communicating differently and what technology can we be comfortable with to keep things moving? In terms of final inspections or physical inspections for building departments, that seems to be the biggest pinch point in getting them scheduled ahead of time. We've done some after hours inspections, so they're on site when the workforce is lower or even they've gone home for the day. So there's lots of creative and innovative ways to solve those things. Labor availability for restart productivity. Obviously, a lot of projects are starting up. One thing your team wants to address is, hey, have we communicated with the subs? We left with 13 mill workers, 4 weeks ago. How do we get the 13 mill workers back? Is the same workforce available because they're already knowledgeable about the scope of the job? So getting everybody up to speed smartly is an extra challenge, and making sure we're asking those questions specifically of the subs. That's really going to be a measure of the strength of the relationships that your CM has. Can we get that open and honest communication with the leaders of the subcontractors to get down to that detailed information? Productivity. With social distancing, one of the big challenges is workforce density in any particular work area. Some states have restrictions of 1 person per 500 square feet, but in any event, making sure we don't get squeeze plays. We have one-way corridors in multi-story buildings. We have one-way stairs. One stair is up, one stair is down. As Paul mentioned, elevators. Restricting the density in elevators. So balancing that with material movement, people movement. There could be some slowdowns. One creative way we're looking to solve that is, how do we separate people by time? So whether we're looking at different shift elements, and that's going to be something that David's going to cover in terms of things that could have cost impacts, that have to be discussed and explored. Contractual alignment. I doubt that all of our contracts and agreements and legalese contemplated all these complications. So I think it's good to have a positive, open discussion about, hey, how do we constructively address this together? We're getting some excellent suggestions from suppliers, off-site manufacturers, and subcontractors about how to keep things moving while mitigating costs. So that's a big question that everybody's got to be creative and look for solutions. And then the big issue, I think, that we segue to is, how do all these things affect the development of maintaining a schedule going forward, and how to keep that criticality in view. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Hamilton, who's going to cover those implications. Thanks, everybody.
So good morning, everyone. It certainly is a privilege and an honor to be here. My role within the company is for the purchasing and procurement aspect across the organization. And it's certainly great to be here with you this morning and try and explain to you some of the things that we've been going through, and just to tie a bow around some of what Jim and Steve and Paul have already mentioned to us. So my role within the company has also involved the Center of Excellence. If we could go to the next slide. So what we have done is refocused our centers of excellence. That's the group of people, like task forces within the company. I'm obviously involved in the estimating and procurement side. So what we did was, whenever the pandemic hit, we took that task force and refocused them, and certainly have re-upped all of the normal work that we typically would do with regard to the centers of excellence. What we really looked at hard, more than we ever have before, is the supply chain management. What we've found is, and I don't need to come on a webinar like this to tell you, that it's a fragmented industry with supply chain manufacturers not really connected to the end users or the installers, subcontractors, and many other middlemen in between. So it's fragmented for sure. It's second tier to us as construction managers, and that's a traditional way. So what we have done is we've turned that on its head, and we have decided to really go down a route with regard to the GPO, group purchasing organizations. And StructureTone, over the last couple of years, has been developing a relationship and has actually signed a contract with the GPO, and that has given us great visibility into manufacturing and into the supply chain. And I want to take that today and tell you some of our findings. So if we go to the next slide. So here we have what I could refer to as maybe the issue. I don't like using the word the problem because we don't like to think about problems, but maybe there are. But here we have the issue. It is a very fluid situation with regard to the supply chain, getting the materials to the job sites, and ensuring that we continue to service our clients in the best possible manner. I often think about it just like as a kid, we used to have those toys and you would put it in your hand and it would slip right out. And the objective was to try to hold on to that toy. And that's kind of what it feels like in supply chain management in some regards. It's a very fluid and moving situation. With regard to manufacturers who are closed because of an infection in their factory, and therefore it becomes much more of a geographic issue than necessarily just a manufacturer issue in some regards, because some of the manufacturers manufacture in various locations. Some of them who only manufacture in certain or one location are the ones that we need to watch out for. So it is a geographic issue. Just to give you an example of that, much of the furniture that we all sit in from day to day in our offices comes from Michigan and is manufactured there. Much of the office front, metal and glass office fronts are manufactured there as well. They had fairly stringent rules early on, so that had a huge impact. Then people knew that it shifted to Italy. Of course, Italy, we are all very familiar with what happened there, but then we found that it was just South Italy. Those plants that were in North Italy were unaffected. So really what I tried to say is here at the top of this green square is it's unpredictable. It really is very unpredictable. There are pinch points, and what we have tried to do is to generate an online spreadsheet across the organization fed into by 12 different people who were designated with myself on really wrapping our arms around the entire supply chain and really trying to figure out where are the pinch points and where are the issues. And so we've just listed some of them here as examples for you. I'm not going to go down through them in a lot of detail because just as I've said already, it changes. And it's almost every day something new's added. I just heard yesterday a faucet manufacturer has ran into an issue just because of demand. Places coming in requiring touchless faucets. So all of a sudden, a huge demand, touchless faucets. So I can tell you that's an issue today. I could almost say 2 weeks from now, that won't be an issue. So just to give you a little bit of an insight into how unpredictable some of these things are. But we listed what we would say here are our highest tracking issues. Lighting, I would say, is probably one of the ones that I would be most concerned about. And what we have done then is not just to bring you the issues, but we want to try and bring the recommendations as well. So we could move to the next slide. So what we have done is we have tried to put our arms around and really understand how can we mitigate the risk. And I know that's why you're here today. Payments and deposits, I'm going to really deal with once I touch on the subcontractor side, but we took expediting material, substituting material, and stockpiling material, those three items, and we rolled those together and we say they don't necessarily apply in every single instance. So each one will apply in its own special area and will apply to a certain type of project. And what we have done is we've come out with a white paper. If you want access to it, we can certainly grant that to you. It was published just last week. And I was responsible with some of our internal folks in writing that. It's a 12-page document just to really bring to your attention what really fits your project best. Is it expediting and all the various nuances associated with that? Is it substituting? We don't like to do that because that runs us awry and amok with our design partners. Or is it stockpiling? Is it buying the material ahead of time? And what do we have to think about to be able to do those things? So that has been invaluable for us to be able to send out, number one, to our teams internally so that they're properly equipped, but then also to folks like yourselves who are end users, designers, architects, etc., who could make very good use of a document like this. And I can tell you it's gotten some very good feedback, so certainly feel free to reach out to us on that. It's obviously something that's too in-depth to go over in a seminar like this today. What we also wanted to do was just to hit fairly quickly on the cost impacts, so you're aware of them. If we could go to the next slide. Cost impacts that you should know about with regard to shutting down a job site, and this will happen, unfortunately, every time someone is affected or infected. and the project has to be cleaned. There is a cost associated with that, and then the remobilization and the restart up of that. Other items that we have seen that are certainly huge cost impacts are just the overall remobilization of a job site, the productivity, wrapping our heads around what's involved with the distancing, social distancing. Do we have to do 2 shifts? Do we have to stagger the starts of those shifts? And then one that really affects us in the tri-state region a lot is obviously vertical transportation. Really understanding how we can flow and move people in and out of a building, even with staggered starts. So I'm not going to go through all of those in a lot of depth. I know some of you will have questions, and I'm sure the chat is probably not blowing up, but I'm sure some of you will have questions about that. We'll be glad to answer those as time goes on. Because I do want to concentrate on my next slide, which is financial impacts with regard to subcontractors. And I would tell you that this is the one that keeps me up at night. Along with supply chain, this is a very large issue. Right now, I feel personally like we're living a little in a bubble, in that there has been some tremendous help given by the government, financial assistance that has been great for the subcontractors, and I'm always the optimist, but I would tell you there is a high level of uncertainty with regard to the subcontractor community. What you can do as owners, and what I would advocate for, is ensuring cash flow to our subcontractors. They are going to be looking for deposits and advances and cash advances. And we want to be very, very smart about that, because we don't want obviously to put money in a pocket of someone who's possibly going out of business. So there's the careful association and pre-qualification and ensuring that our subcontractors are fully solvent, but yet ensuring that they have the right money to be able to purchase material. Supplier credit for them has gone to a cash on demand, cash on delivery type model. And that worries me, because where they used to have 30, 60 days credit with some suppliers, and now those suppliers are saying that credit has all but evaporated, and then owners are asking for their payment terms to the GC and also to the subcontractor being elongated. You'll see that in the middle, the subcontractor is the one with that elasticity, and that could very quickly go broke. So it's certainly, we have done everything we can to try and ensure that our subcontractors are as solvent as they possibly can be. We hosted a number of webinars. We've done 3 of them in total for our subcontractor base across the national US, and trying to bring to them the best possible information with a couple of partners like KPMG and Mints, just to try and ensure that they have the right tools and that they're taking advantage of the CARES loans, the PPP, payroll protection program, that they're taking a full advantage of all the monies that are available to them as subcontractors. SDI is obviously a top of the list as with regard to us as being construction managers as well, subcontractor default insurance and also bonding. We certainly recommend SDI as its one single policy rather than multiple policies held by the subcontractors. So certainly something to talk to with your CM about, and we would certainly love to talk more to you about that. Just on to my last slide. Just as the role of the CM and just controlling the cost overall, I would say, and I'm sure everybody on the line today is going to be saying, well, productivity calculations, how can you help us understand what those really are? And my answer to you would be that awful word, depends. It depends on so many different variables. It depends, as Leighton has just brought out, with some of their greenfield sites, some of their more single-story buildings, etc., completely opposite or very different from a lot of the high-rise work that they do, as well as us here in the Northeast. So the density of even the TI, the tenant interior projects. So a lot of this needs to be communicated with the construction manager. And obviously communication, I think as Steve had mentioned that and really I want to drill that home, is communication with your CM is key, with understanding how they're going to bring workers to the project, etc. So with that, I think we're running short in time, so I'm going to hand over to Rob Leon.
Tone. My role at Structure Tone is that I lead the group that delivers services to our clients all across North America, Canada, the UK, and Ireland. And what we are meant to do is really be the eyes and the ears and the advocates for the clients. So this slide really depicts what we're all talking about today. Our role as CMs and as a project delivery team is really to gather all the information, to be communicating clearly, to be transparent, so that the client, the owners, the landlords can make the decisions that they need to make. So I'm just going to go around here. There are certain questions that we all need to be asking of each other, because everything that we're doing right now, especially, is interdependent on one another more than ever. This diagram is suitable for a successful project on good terms, and now we're in a very different environment. So it's paramount that we're very clear in our communications and that we're very transparent. So things to think about when you talk to your design team is that, what kind of revisions are going to be possibly made to the HVAC systems that affect your buildings? Is there going to be air purification or filtration that's going to be added? Is there going to be increased outdoor air possibly? Will there be revisions to the entryways because of touchless items, such as doors or elevator call buttons? You heard Dave talk about the issue that because of touchless faucets, that there's a run on that, and there's going to be an impact on the supply chain from there. The other question you should be asking your design team is, what are their on-site protocols going to be? So some may not want to come to the job site during peak hours. They may be asked to be coming there on off hours, which is fine. We can accommodate that. However, if we are also running second shifts or multiple shifts, then how does that all work? So it's working with the design team, asking them the right questions so that we can have the information for you to make the right decisions. Also, when you talk about the supply chain, like Dave did, talking to your architect to find out if they have national relationships. I think now also more than ever is we need to be flexible and collaborative when procuring the materials, so we avoid any further schedule impacts. And that, again, that takes team effort. Things to be asking your CMs is, what are your COVID guidelines? I think Paul and Steve did an excellent job in laying out the guidelines that we have. There is a tremendous amount of detail that goes behind that we can make available to you. We'll give you information on how to contact us, but we gave you the highlights. There was a tremendous amount of detail. As everybody said, it depends on the job, it depends on the municipality where you're working, but there is so much importance into protecting ourselves or protecting our workers and protecting the other teammates that sometimes need to come onto those projects. Also, you heard Dave about mitigating the risk. So finding out from your construction manager, what is the pre-qualification process that they have in place? What is the subcontractor default insurance program that they have as well? And how to implement that on the project. And then overall, overarching, finding out if the initial, requirements of the project can still be met. The initial schedule, the initial goals, the initial financial goals as well, because all of these items are impacting everything that we do. So is there the availability to do certain things like off-site assembly? If we want to reduce the manpower on the job, because that's a very safe thing to do, can we go to off-site assemblies? Can we go to prefabrication? So there are a lot of things in that to be considered. When you think about your third-party vendors like AV, security, IT, furniture, they're often at the back end of the project. They're also not always local. Sometimes they fly in from other places to implement their final pieces. So again, connecting with your third-party vendors is very, very important. And I think, we talked about the subcontractors and supply chains. We talked about the municipal agencies. Again, just having to go deep into the detail with them to find out what their protocols are, what their financial strength is, what their availability is, and what their labor force is as well is good to understand. When we talk about you as a landlord and property owner, things to consider that's very important is, what is the separation of construction workers from your tenants? Dave and Paul and Steve all went through that in very great detail. but there are things you have to consider. But then there's also the support for the trades that if we are working second shifts and multiple shifts, the support that you may need to provide, whether it's elevator operators, building engineers and the like, and keeping the project going and efficient. Like I said before, will the design team impact your base building systems for new air filtration and outdoor air? And then what, if anything, if you're going to have your own protocols or how to work within your building, getting those new rules and regulations out sooner rather than later is very, very important, because again, like I said, the transparency and the transformance of information is very, very important. So I apologize for the audio there, but I want to hand it back to Jim. Thanks very much.
Jim, you're muted.
Rob, thanks so much for that. I'm on now, yeah?
Yes.
So we're going to wrap up the presentation piece in a minute, and then we'll get right into Q&A. I wanted to just point out some items on this chart that's unique to Structured Tone Organization, STO Building Group, but it's something I think to put in the back of your minds about the importance for all contractors across, the United States that are returning to work. I boxed out 3 items on our stats slide here because I want your eyes to go to the EMR rating of 0.73. So we've always been very proud of our safety record, and safety is really at the top of the chart in any conversation about project planning. And I want to just point out that our unique relationship with subcontractors, which I'll comment further on in a second, it relies on their confidence that we can run a safe and efficient and healthy site. The way they'll price the job, the way they're going to commit their best and brightest stars to the job site, their belief that they can get paid efficiently, paid quickly. It all relies on our presentation that the site is going to be efficient and safe. And we can't do that in a vacuum. We need a partnership with our client, the design team, and the landlords, real estate executives, to be clear, especially in this current environment, on what the guidelines will be on each and every site. The more clear we can be, the more efficient we can price the job, and the more attraction the job site will have by the subcontractor market. And the benefit then, goes to the client in a savings, because we're not getting pricing that has all kinds of variables built in. And, I'd like to say that as a result, the landlords ultimately also get the benefit of efficient pricing at their property. So the STO group is 40 cities. What I didn't mention, which is one of the most unique facts about our organization, is that we have about 5,000 active subcontractor companies that we have, 20 or 25,000 subcontracts out with. So those 5,000 relationships across the United States, really North America, relies on a lot of two-way street dialogue, and having many of those subcontractors being restarted, we have been in in-depth conversations with them about what they need to be safe. And they're ultimately going to view returning to our sites as a question of how knowledgeable is the STO team when I get back to my site? How safe will my workers be? And that's a really in-depth two-way street relationship that's unique. I would recommend anybody that's restarting their property or restarting their project have an in-depth conversation about subcontractors that are being considered for the project, and also pre-qualifying. What's being done differently to pre-qualify these subcontractors, to make sure that there's not a financial condition that's unknown, whether it's the balance sheet of the subcontractors or it's how much benefit will a deposit up front give the client, or the landlord for that matter, in terms of delivery or price. It's not out of the question to think that quick pay or pay twice a month versus once a month might actually result in a discount. So the other thing I would say, Dave has alluded to a lot of the strategies around pricing, is that the relationship with these subs have allowed us to really understand how to break down these jobs in greater detail, so that the subs can price, whether it's the rates or units, to make sure that when there is a surprise on the job, and there very well may be because of the unknown health situations we're dealing with, or supply chain challenges, that we're not then paying a high price on a change. We want to get all the units up front when the subcontractors are most competitive. and therefore when there is a change or a surprise in the job, that we're actually using rates that are as competitive as possible. So the other thing STO Building Group did during the crisis is we decided to not do any layoffs or furloughs. Most of our industry is impacted in some way by layoffs or furloughs. We decided to hold on to our staff. We did do a payroll reduction for a period of time, but what the beauty is going to be is as these cities are returning to normal, all of our staff are in place, not just the frontline field staff, but also the support staff at the office. And I'd also throw that out as an item to discuss with your partners about, what kind of impact has the crisis had on their staffing. We're not going to be in a learning curve with new staff that need to be brought back on, or staff that were sitting at home idle that need to be re-educated. So we're pretty proud of that. We've got some questions that have been popping up on the screen. I'm happy to start going there. But this slide here does show the speakers for today, some of our other contacts and their emails. And, that's really the highlights of Structured Tone. We're ready to answer some Q&A, Mike.
Thank you, Jim. So let's get through this as quickly as we can. If we don't get to some of the questions, we'll make sure we answer them. Okay, so what are you seeing most frequently in regards to inspections, meaning photo documentation, Zoom sessions with code officials, architect certifications? How are you doing the virtual stuff, if at all, with local code officials?
Steve?
Yeah, I can field that, and then maybe Paul could add on. We're seeing a myriad of all of the above. If it's a repeat inspection of something that they've already seen constructed properly, photo documentation seems to work a lot. If it's something new, we're doing FaceTime walkarounds. And since we are having difficulties getting design partners out there with us, we're basically teaming those groups up in some kind of Zoom chat room, or in some cases, they've gotten together on Microsoft Teams. So there's a lot of technology platforms that have been very helpful for this. So we're seeing a little bit of everything.
Okay. Another question. Are the costs for cleanup and shutdown startup on a job site with an infected person being passed on to the principals or the clients?
I'll handle that one because we've been through this a number of times. The answer, and I don't want it to sound like I'm punting, but it really depends. And what we have done is tried to work with our customer to find the right solution that doesn't add some tremendous cost or schedule implication, and addresses the problem for the lowest possible cost that actually will take care of the problem. And we've had a couple of times in very large projects where we did have to spend some real money cleaning the place up. And we've worked it out with the owner in ways that were mutually satisfactory to both of us based on what the contract said and how we felt about the particular issue. Okay, thanks. A couple of questions dealing with price gouging. Are you seeing much price gouging for in-demand products? Is lighting one of those? Why is that such an issue in the supply chain?
David, will you take that?
Sure, Jim, thanks. What we found was that California really...
You got to speak up.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. What we found with lighting was West Coast. A lot of lights are actually manufactured out in the West Coast. And with California being one of the first states to have fairly stringent rules with regard to that, it had a big impact on lighting initially. I actually, to be honest with you, was completely surprised by just how many were on the West Coast. I know we've got quite a few who manufacture here on the East Coast as well. Bits and bobs, as we call them. Some of the little parts that come from other countries, be it China, Italy, etc., certainly affected early on as well. Those lighting just became a very critical issue early on. As regards, and then logistics, even when we're talking about getting goods that have been manufactured to job sites, that's part of the issue and part of what we want to keep on top of and keep ensuring that we don't take our eye off the ball with that regard either. On the price gouging, I would say we haven't seen that much of that. It's up to us to ensure that our clients are paying fair market price. And I would tell you that there's still enough competition in the marketplace for those who want to ensure that they have projects still coming down the line and down the pike to them, that they don't want to be seen to be that person that's stepping out and putting in higher pricing. So we have enough of a supply out there with regard to the number of suppliers who will all keep each other honest in that regard, with regard to pricing and being able to ensure that there's enough people submitting pricing on each project. So that would be the way that we would see that it's happening. And of course, just what we know as being typical cost prices on those projects. We have not seen that just as yet. PPE, of course, you hear the horror stories, and there always will be the exceptions.
David, I'm going to just add to that. In the marketplace, as far as a trend, we are seeing the market go toward a buyer's market. But what's going to continue to be important is a lot of planning in front of that to make sure that there's no surprises on the total budget for the projects. But the subcontractors are getting very competitive as the news grows that the economy is in dire straits. And I think you're going to see some benefits from that over the coming months. But again, I'll just reiterate, underscore, budgeting is really key, that there's no surprises in terms of all the pieces needed to get through a job with these conditions. But I think pricing is going to get more competitive, and that the gouging thing is going to really send some people off the bid list permanently at a time like this. To behave poorly will be remembered for many years.
One last question. Are clients adding any pandemic-related features to their buildings, like elevators that open without touch, doors, different air handling on a per room basis to keep spaces from contaminated air? Anyone?
I can take that. If
Rob, would you take that?
Rob?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Problem. All right, sorry about that. Yes,
That's good.
we're getting a lot of different inquiries, from adding air purification and certain HEPA filters to different space requirements, the layouts that they're asking us to do, de-densification of their spaces, certainly the touchless air pieces of equipment that they want to put in. The thing that we've seen the most is that there's a lot of inquiries right now, and there's a lot of kind of holdback. You know, the clients, they don't want to make the wrong decision. And that's what I said earlier about getting all the facts and information from the team members so that they can make the decision. That's not going to just be like, what do we need to do today, but what do we need to do also for tomorrow in the future? So that's, I think, the key component of that is that it's still an unknown of what we're doing in the long term. And a client doesn't want to make the wrong decision for the short term that'll kind of affect them, you know, in a costly way going forward.
Listen, folks, I think we're out of time. If everybody wants to make one final quick closing comment, I want to thank you all. It's a great job. Starting with who? Jim? Or anybody have any closing comment?
I just want to thank the team. I could tell you that we had 3 more hours of stuff to cover with everybody, and that's because this is a learning experience, and never in our history have we all been told to go home and not come back as a city, and then to be told come back to the city. So there's going to be a lot of inefficiencies that will get worked out. I would recommend strongly you partner with those who have been active throughout the crises is your best bet forward, because those groups are already hitting the ground running. And to partner with folks that are learning for the first time when the cities open up might be you know, something you want to avoid. Everybody should be on the same page by the summer sometime. So good luck out there and stay safe. Be healthy.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just I encourage, sorry, Mike, that there's information on how to contact each of us on